Good afternoon, everyone. I'm calling this meeting to order. It's our Governance and Nominations Committee meeting for February 9th. And my first order of business is to turn straight to Juanita and, and say, how am I doing so far?
So far, you're doing
It's a little daunting because I really respect and admire Juanita and all of you. But let's do this, okay? Everybody with me?
absolutely
with you.
Okay, thank you. Can we call the roll, please, Ken?
Yes, sir. Chairman Rick Forth,
Present.
Regent Juanita James,
present.
Regent Ira Bloom,
Present.
Regent Donald Williams.
Present.
Mr. Chairman, you have a quorum.
Excellent. Thank you. Thanks, everybody, for being here today. And I see the next item on the agenda is introductory remarks. And we have a pretty full agenda, and we're going through this leadership transition too. So I hope that this meeting can be pretty flexible and fluid, and that we can do some good work together today. So that's it for me. Can I have a motion to adopt our agenda for today's meeting, please?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, good. All in favor, signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
And the next item of business is the approval of the minutes for our January 12th, 2026 meeting. Can I have a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
Second.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So I'll just say this by way of introduction. We, and I'm really glad to be able to say this. We have a lot of really important issues on our agenda, and that's due to Juanita's leadership and our attention to these kinds of issues. And like Marty often says to us, our job is to do the right thing and to do it the right way. And the items that are in front of us today and the items that we'll continue to address as the Governance and Nominating Committee help, I believe, if we do our jobs the way I know we can, it will help us to continue to do it the right way. And that's what this is about, a lot of these items. So the first item of business actually is succession planning for CSCU and its various institutions. And but I'll do this quickly. We want to talk about our board orientation schedule, which has to do with the really good work that Don and others have done over the past few months to put together the roles and responsibilities, to tie it into the statutes that govern our work and other earlier policies that guide the way we do our work. And that orientation schedule, I believe, is now required by law for our board members. And so I saw the email that went out, I think it was last week, and we're already trying to get that scheduled. So thank you for that. We'll talk about that a little bit more. Our governance review and discussion, has to do with the chart matrix that we use to try to fill vacant positions on the board. And an issue which is, I think, really, really important for us is the executive committee or emergent circumstances / special meetings item. I really feel like I'll rest a little easier when we have agreed to something and that the full board also agrees with that. And then finally, the charter review of the various committees of our board. That's a lot. So let's see how much of this we can get through today. I'm glad that Chancellor Meduco has joined us too. Thanks, John, for being with us. Appreciate it. Okay, On the succession planning, Karen, can I turn to you and ask you to help set this up for us? I didn't give you much warning on this, but if you could help us set this up, I'd appreciate it.
Absolutely, Mr. Chairman. With respect to the materials that were sent out, I was asked to prepare several options under which the board could for which this committee and then ultimately the board could consider how they would like to codify the requirement to have some form of a succession plan. The first item in your packet, which starts at page 5, is a draft of a policy that applies to both the chancellor and then for the presidents to the chancellor. So the chancellor's responsibility to the board and then the president's responsibility to the chancellor. So I'll walk through that first one and you'll see much of what I talk about is reflected in each of the drafts, at least as to some of the basics that are there. So the purpose of this is to have a formal succession plan for the system office and the institutions in the event that there is a long-term or short-term planned or unplanned absence of the leadership of those institutions. You'll see in the definitions, we define extended absence, long-term absence, and short-term absence.
Mm-hmm.
And these are, again, are subject to change based on, what the committee discusses here with regard to these drafts. Short-term absence I defined as 30 days or less, and I excluded vacations because typically the chancellor or president will notify their boss when they're going to be on vacation, and that's a known and usually a very well-defined period of time. Could be 30 days if somebody's lucky enough to be able to schedule that time off, but generally exclude vacations from that. And it has, typically they know when they're going to be returning. So I defined a long-term absence as somewhere between 30 and 90 days, which is a period of time that is somewhat lengthy, but doesn't necessarily require that there be an interim appointed in that time period. And then an extended absence would be something that is longer than 90 days. In each of the contracts or employment agreements with your leaders is a provision with regard to the absence of that leader for 90 or more days. And so I took that to define what we consider to be, or what could be considered as an extended absence, which may or may not be approved, but each of the contracts has provisions addressing what could happen in the event that an absence extends longer than 90 days. In each of these three categories, in the first policy at page 5, in the short-term absence, the chancellor would provide the Board of Regents with a letter informing them of who is the individual designated by the chancellor to be responsible to ensure the continuity of operations during the absence, whether it's planned or unplanned. So it would be done at the beginning of the fiscal year and be applicable for the entirety of the fiscal year unless there is something that necessitates a change, in which case the chancellor would update that letter as appropriate.
So Karen, can I ask you a question on this one?
Certainly.
Do you want us to wait till we get to the end before we ask questions, or should we ask them as they come?
Entirely up to the committee.
Rick, what's your preference?
Let's ask questions as they come up. So please, Juanita.
Okay, this one is the chancellor. In other words, we're approaching this from the chancellor can do this based on the individual and the position, as opposed to us wanting to do something like name an effective position to be the person in charge when the chancellor is absent. I just wanted to clarify that.
Correct. One of the later drafts that I put in front of you has a defined position that
Okay.
steps in for the chancellor.
Okay, thank you.
The options. We then turn to a long-term absence. Similarly, the chancellor would provide the chair with a letter recommending 2 or 3 individuals who possess the necessary skills and qualifications to be, in essence, an acting chancellor for a period of that up to 90 days. To ensure continuity of the operations, the individuals recommended shall be from the chancellor's senior level leaders with executive level administrative experience and qualified by policy or delegation to sign contracts and other instruments on behalf of the CSCU system. So that for that longer term absence, it provides a category of employees that meet those qualifications, but it would be the chancellor determining who he is recommending to do that, and would be providing that to the board as a recommendation. And given that it would be an acting chancellor, it's that gives the board the opportunity to weigh in. It also defines what would happen to the existing chancellor or the acting chancellor, which is that they could be provided additional duties pay during that period of time, since it is up to 3 months, unless it's extended. And then the next category is the extended absence, which is something that exceeds 90 days. The board may, in accordance with your bylaws, appoint an interim chancellor to lead the system in those circumstances. And they would have, and it also then provides that an acting or interim chancellor would have full authority during that period of time. And then these are repeated for the presidents in the same manner, just the different, it would be reported to the chancellor rather than the board.
Got it.
Are there questions for Karen on the general framework of this policy?
Nope.
I'm pretty sure I know the answer to this, but just for clarification's sake, under each of the succession plans, there are 4 different titles listed, I believe. No, 4 for the chancellor and 2 for the presidents, right? Is there, and you probably just addressed this, but just to be clear about this, are we talking about a succession plan that authorizes or names just one person in each of those cases? Or do the duties somehow get allocated to each of the people, each of the positions listed?
In the third option that I provided you, which has those 4 positions listed or
Right.
2 positions listed, it would be the chancellor's duties would essentially be spread among those positions, or the president's duties spread among those positions, which is, you know, a model that is used in other institutions. That could be a list, you know, a defined list from which the chancellor could choose from, as opposed to having 4 people or 2 people run things. And in looking at the chancellor's office or the system office, there's really sort of 4 divisions within that office. So that's the reason for the 4 titles that I included in that particular part of that proposal. And then if you look at a university or a college, there's typically the academic side of the house and then the administrative side of the house. And so that's the manner in which I drafted those. In the middle policy, the one which only lists a single, at least for the short-term absence, it provides for the vice president of administration and CFO to be the responsible leader in the absence of the chancellor to lead the system office. And then and if there was an absence there, then there would have to be a different, that's where you see the XXX, because really don't have a recommendation necessarily there as to who it would be if you didn't have a vice president of administration and CFO, or if that person became unable to serve for a particular reason. And the same is true of the presidents. It would be their chief fiscal officer who would serve under continuity of operations. And there's actually a 4th model that I didn't necessarily draft out, but which would be to amend the bylaws to have something as simple as a sentence that says that the president or the chancellor or the president shall annually provide notification to the Board of Trustees and to the employees of the system that in their absence, the following person is, shall designate somebody annually to be that one person with full role, with full authority and responsibility during that period of time. And typically these are, even in the short-term absence, is only exercised when the chancellor is unable, or, whether it's because of connectivity issues, they're taking, a vacation in the, to hike Mount Everest. And so the ability to stay connected to the office is not able to be done regularly, as opposed to, somewhere where they're traveling to a conference and, they're in regular contact with the office and it's easy to reach them, type of thing. Or obviously somebody who is out because of a medical issue.
Thanks for that clarification. Discussion on the three options we've been given. Anybody, any questions, any strong feelings about which of the three might work best for us? I am going to call on John in a minute, but I want to give the committee members a chance to ask any questions or weigh in on this.
Okay. Okay.
Please.
Well, Ira had his hand up first.
No, go ahead, Juanita.
No, I was going to say my question leads directly into the next question about the chancellor, which is in the second scenario where we're trying to define positions as opposed to individuals. As the chancellor makes decisions in terms of his organization structure, perhaps title changes, other moves as we shape and execute our strategic goals and plans. I'm just wondering if the first one, at least for the short term, might be more flexible. Because if not, if we designate positions, let's say, for example, VP of Administration and Chief Financial Officer, we might not have a VP of Chief, Dr. Maduko might decide to reorganize those roles and responsibilities, and we may end up having different titles. So I'm just wondering, how do we give the appropriate structure and communicate so people know whom to go to, but still within the flexibility of knowing that the next couple of years are going to be pretty fluid as far as how the organization shapes and changes.
Yeah, that's helpful, Juanita. Thank you. Ira, question or comments?
Well, I guess some comments. One is when we talk about, for example, the chancellor, an individual designated by the chancellor responsible to ensure continuity. I assume in these cases, we're talking about someone from within the CSCU system. We don't actually say that explicitly, but I assume for this type of situation, we don't want somebody to come in from outside.
And going back to the first one, which is the one that had the, just the designee based on a senior leadership role and provides the flexibility that Regent James was discussing. It does say leader responsible should be a senior level leader with executive level administration. You're right. And qualified by policy or delegation to sign contracts or other instruments on behalf of the CSCU system. So you're right. I did contemplate this as an internal selection. But that could be better defined.
I think it'd be good if we could.
I had one more. I had one more comment. I'm constitutionally opposed to having ultimate responsibility divided among people. Somebody has to have, because even though we have defined areas, they overlap. And I think in the absence of the chancellor or the absence of a president of one of the system campuses, I think there needs to be one person responsible ultimately responsible for what happens in that location. So I would be very much against the idea of dividing it among two or three or four people.
Yeah, that's why I asked the question I did earlier. Unity of command, I think, is really important in matters like this. So I do agree with you. Other comments or questions? Don?
In addition to deciding the question in terms of if we're picking individuals or offices, I want to back up just in terms of section 2 definitions where it says for extended, long-term, short-term, it says when such absence in which it is expected that the chancellor shall be, unavailable for X period of time. But it doesn't say who makes that decision. I think the assumption here, I believe, is that the chancellor is making the decision, is going to notify somebody, presumably the board, that the chancellor expects to be absent for a brief time or a period that extends 90 days or the long term, et cetera, and I think if we're clear in that, then we know that under these circumstances, when there's to be an expected absence of the chancellor, here's the person who is otherwise in charge. And maybe that has to be approved by the board. Maybe that needs to. Maybe the chancellor is submitting that to the board for approval, or maybe this is structured so that the notification from the chancellor is all we need because it's following one of these predictable periods of short-term, extended, long-term, whatever, right? But then I think there should be some other category saying something to the extent that if the chancellor is for any reason unable to execute the duties of the chancellorship, then notification to the Board of Regents will be made, and there should be, and then we fill that out, and then the board then calls an emergency meeting or whatever, and maybe there's there's a person designated already for an absent chancellorship or an absent chancellor, but in a situation where the chancellor is not giving us notification, right? Something happens, they're way on you've got that senator from, where was it, North Carolina or something, who said he's going to hike the Appalachian Trail and he disappears. And let's say the chancellor was going to do that, and there was a short-term absence or whatever, but that then, or there's no notification whatsoever. All of a sudden, there's not a chancellor. We didn't get that notification that it's short-term, long-term, or extended, that there's some other thing that kicks in here. So that, and bottom line, we know who is making this call. When it's expected that the chancellor, I think the assumption is the chancellor is making that call. We spell that out. The chancellor then provides the notification to the board.
Yep. Thank you, Don. That's good too. Karen.
Yes, and I think the first two contemplate that in the sense that July 1st of each fiscal year, the chancellor is designating somebody to be in that role in the event, whether it's planned or unplanned, to serve during that period of time. And to your point, Regent Williams, if something occurs, such as the senator from North Carolina went hiking, or God forbid, some sort of a medical emergency that puts the person out for a period that is unknown.
Right.
If you get to the 90 days, then under the policy as contemplated, the draft policy, the board can step in when it gets to 90 days and make that decision going forward, because it's an extended absence of potentially an unknown duration. And so you could either stay with the existing person, appoint them as interim, or make other decisions in that regard, again, depending on what the circumstances are. But we could certainly clarify that two-step process.
Does that sound good to you, Don? As a way to clarify that?
Yes, yes. As long as there's not a period of time where the chancellor is away and there has not been a designation of yes, it's going to be a short-term absence long, and therefore this person or that person or the other person, um, that it's just sort of clear who's in charge at any time, and in this, when it's expected that they will be away for who is making that call.
Yep. It makes good sense. Karen, you good on that? Can you help us with that?
Yes, absolutely. And if you look at the third proposal, it was the chancellor designates somebody, and if the chancellor didn't designate somebody, then it would go to the 4 people. That's where you could have it, that's a list for which the board could choose from, or however you want to do it. But again, you're right, the titles may change, not the roles necessarily, but the titles may change. So I can absolutely work with that to refine it.
Yeah,
Okay.
and it's not just who's in charge there and the designation that the chancellor makes. It's who's making the call that the chancellor is going to be away less than 30 days, more than 30 days, more than 90 days. Is that, or do we just wait? Does time go by and then after 90 days, then it's this and, et cetera. But it seems like there's an expectation that there's some kind of call being made, that it's a short term, long term, or extended. And I would see situations where a chancellor would have the foresight to know they're going on an extended vacation, or safari or whatever it is, out of cell phone range, and they're going to be away for X amount of time, and they would in advance set that up.
Yeah, so
Right.
I see what you're saying, if I may. I apologize, Mr. Chairman.
That's fine, please.
That, there's the designation at the beginning of the year, but when is that designation triggered and who triggers it? Is that a good way to say it, Don? Excuse me, Regent Williams?
Yeah, yeah, sure. I mean, I'm looking at these different categories, and I just don't know whether they spring to life. Just we watch the calendar, and still no chancellor, so now it's gone from a short term to a long term. Oh well, still no chancellor, so now it's gone from a long term to extended. Um, I mean that just seems a little dicey to me.
So,
I think we should have something. If we don't know, maybe we should have, if it's unknown, then we could have a statement like the board leadership will act.
Right. I mean, if it's unknown, if the chancellor doesn't know, and all of a sudden the chancellor is unavailable, and that's when this other kind of thing could kick in and say, if the chancellor is unavailable for any reason, that's when the secretary of the board of regents calls a meeting, and we either appoint that person, we have a person to go to that the chancellor has in advance designated who that person would be if the chancellorship opens up unexpectedly, and the duration of which we don't know.
yeah, I'm gonna call on John in just a minute. My feeling is that this is a succession plan, and our basic contract with our chancellor is takes precedent over just about anything, unless we really don't know. And I hope we could be very clear in any policy we adopt, that this discussion, which is really important and needs to be clarified, um, is only comes into play when there's no way to know what the status is, or to predict long term what the availability of the chancellor will be. That would be my 2 cents. My other comment, and then I'll ask John to help us out with this discussion. I agree with Ira. I'm very uncomfortable with any arrangement that allows multiple people to replace the chancellor. And I think that if you're asking me, that should not be part of any recommendation we make to the full board. But the first two options are interesting, and I'd be real interested to hear what our chancellor thinks about this. John?
Hey, good afternoon, Regents. Chair Port, great discussion. I think for starters, to Regent Williams' questions and concerns, I think at any moment, if the chancellor or even an institutional president becomes incapacitated, I think that's where we exercise the management confidential policy that speaks to, a senior leader of that level being incapacitated. I believe in the contracts of our presidents and in my interim contract, it speaks to if I'm incapacitated, that's when the board steps in and then they have their deliberation in terms of who has taken the interim or temporary helm of this role. So Karen, I do think if we make reference to the current policies we have on the books that speaks to, we don't know what happened to me. I just left the front door and never came back for some reason. So I think that's one. I think two, we have different titles across the institutions. So for example, Central doesn't have a CFO. So I wouldn't want to be specific to titles versus maybe the pool of senior administrators at the institutions, and in the case of the system office, the pool of the senior administration here. So then it gives the board, if the board has to step in, okay, we can choose from these group of individuals versus being handcuffed to these four positions or roles. One, we might not have a person in that role, or two, the person in that role might be new. They might have been here a month and they don't have the institutional wisdom to make certain levels of decisions in terms of the operations of that. And then lastly, I do think I would recommend maybe a role of the board chair, right? So Regent Williams, to your point, how do we make the determination if it's 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, and whether or not the absence is something that was known or unknown? I do think there could be a role for the board chair to step in and say, there's been zero communication with the board chair, therefore I'm electing a special meeting or making the determination that we need to activate this policy of succession.
Yeah, that makes
good.
sense. Any comments or response to John, to Chancellor Maduco?
I think that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Agreed. Karen, can you help us to modify the language and what we ultimately adopt and propose to the full board to reflect the conversation that we've had so far here?
Absolutely.
Okay. Does anyone have a preference as to option one or option two? Can I just say this? As chair, I try to keep my mouth shut for most of this discussion, but I believe that the chancellor, the CEO, should have an opportunity to recommend at least a couple names in the event of an absence. But that's, other people may not see it that way, but that's what I think.
So that if I may, Mr. Chairman, so that I'm clear in terms of what you're looking for. So you don't want the chancellor to, or I shouldn't say you don't want, you're not proposing that the chancellor actually indicate to you who he's designating to carry on things if he's going to be absent for a known period of time that's less than 90 days. You want him to provide names to the board chair and the board chair to designate that, or only in the case of a total, he or she is completely out of the picture?
I hope I haven't confused this. As I read the first and second option, the first one has the chancellor recommending two or three names to the board, and the board makes a decision. second option names a specific title. Am I accurate in saying that, or if I'm wrong, please say so.
I don't think I contemplated an approval unless it was going to be in the 30 to 90 day range, that it was just the chancellor will designate somebody to act in the absence of the chancellor.
Yeah,
I see your point. I do. Juanita, please.
so now that we've talked all about variations on the options, I read option one as the chancellor will designate who's going to be the person in charge in his absence.
Yes.
I saw option two as, rather than the individual, it would be the position. That, in other words, when I'm not available, my CFO is the one in charge. And based on what Dr. Meduco said, it doesn't seem like the second option makes sense at this point for us. Am I getting that right?
That's a clarification, Juanita, to some of the questions I was asking. So thank you for that. But to Juanita's point, is that accurate?
That is an accurate description of the two proposals, and based on what the chancellor was recommending and the discussion here, that it not be a defined position, because the positions may not exist forever, and have to go back and amend the policy to reflect a different title or a different position if you were to do it by position as opposed to individual.
It's also I don't think we'd want to see an interim on top of an interim.
Yeah.
The fallback position should be somebody, I think, and permanently in the position that however we define it, permanently in the position they're in.
But Ira, we have an interim on top of an interim now in a lot of
I'm sorry.
circumstances. We have an interim on top of an interim now in a number of positions, because the chancellor is interim. We have a couple of interim presidents. We have
But if the chancellor is not available, I mean, for whatever reason we're talking about now, right?
right.
Wouldn't we want someone who's not an interim to?
Yeah.
Because I think you're putting that person in a very, if that person is interim, you're putting that person in a kind of precarious position, because they don't have a sure grasp on the job they're in. Now we're asking them to do a second job, which, they're a substitute for the moment.
So for example, then if something were to happen and John were going to be gone for an extended period of time, we would say that he cannot suggest, for example, President Royal to be his designee because she's also an interim. That's
the question I'm raising.
Yeah.
My personal feeling on that is that, one, we should start by asking, when it's possible, our chancellor for their recommendation. And secondly, I don't think someone else's interim status should necessarily prevent them from being the one to be named to step in. Because of what Anita's saying, but also, who knows, 20 years from now, we might have somebody in an interim status who is clearly the right person to step in at that point in time.
So we
Don?
get the letter once a year, right? We get the letter from the chancellor once a year, making these designations as to who steps in as chancellor or who steps in as president.
Right.
So the chancellor would know what the term is, even of an interim, and maybe if there's, going back to what you were talking about earlier, Rick, in terms of the having more than one choice. Maybe it doesn't necessarily have to be more than one choice, but maybe the chancellor has to put at least two people Like if I'm not around as chancellor, then this person steps in, and if that person's not available or doesn't work here anymore, then this next person steps in. If we're worried about covering bases about by naming people, what if the person isn't there? Maybe or conversely, if we want to use the position, we could say, the CFO steps in, and if the CFO is not available, then the who knows what, the executive assistant steps in, and because they have more institutional knowledge than anybody.
Anyway, it's true. John, what do you think?
Again,
Yeah, go ahead.
John, please. Yeah.
I would say I think the optionality of limited to senior officials, have to be at the institutional level and the system office level. In terms of the interim piece, I understand where Region Bloom is coming from in terms of, if the interim just got here and is trying to stay above water to make that leap. But I think that could be a judgment call, and maybe again forwarding options to the board to say, I recommend these individuals or this level of position, and let the board do their vetting to say, hey, we are comfortable with this person regardless, of their approach. I think it's one. Yeah, that's that. I mean, again, I think this will be helpful for the system. Obviously in terms of succession planning. My only concern is not getting married to titles, because obviously those can change. Right. And I think, again, give even the chancellor optionality to pick from a pool of senior officials to make it safe. And then, Ms. Buffkin, I think in terms of every July 1st providing a list, I understand from the chancellor's office, but I'm not sure about the president's office, because maybe it's the chancellor's office says, hey, we will pick from one of the vice presidents at the institutional level to step in when it comes to that. And then Region Bloom, to your point, I know the SUNY system uses and I think possibly even CUNY and some other systems uses a title administrator in charge when dealing with the absence of a senior official. In the case of chancellor, all right, you're designated administrator in charge for this period of time until quote unquote the board and or the system gets this matter sorted out. So for example, if it goes beyond it's 90 days and goes beyond 90 days, and now there's a question about the return of the chancellor's role, obviously the board would have to have that meeting and discuss, what's a more semi-permanent, replacements. I do think, Karen, that the policy should speak to that, okay, there are these designations, but what if we go past, 90 days? I think specifying, reinserting that the board has to step in and make a more long-term decision.
Yeah.
I think that's helpful. Thank you. Other questions or comments? I'm going to try to synthesize this and ask Karen to come back to us again with an updated single policy option. But any other questions or comments?
Don's hand is still up.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Don, sorry.
I'll put that down. Only that I would hate to see us have to make a choice. I would hate to have it be a situation where the board picks from these three who have been designated. That's going to slow things down and complicate things.
Yeah. I would prefer to see the chancellor designate in order, his preference. What I think is good about this is the fact that what we're basically saying, we're thinking in advance about what if, as opposed to being caught flat-footed if something happens.
Yeah.
And the fact that the chancellor would present to us, if something happens to me, here's my, here are the people, here's the person that I would designate. If that person's not available, here's the second person. Because then the board knows in advance what the chancellor is thinking in terms of, if necessary, if we have to have someone step in. And I think that solves the purpose, because what we were trying to solve for is the uncertainty of who's running the show if the chancellor is not available. And I think this does that. And by having the conversation in advance, the chancellor has had to think about it, and the board understands what the chancellor's thinking is.
Yeah, I like that. Juanita, I think you just did a really nice job of summarizing or synthesizing this conversation. So thank you for that. Karen, can you take another shot at one policy that summarizes and is true to this conversation, as Juanita just did for us?
Yes.
Great. What, in terms of next
Can I-
steps, I'm sorry,
If
Ira,
I-
go ahead.
I want to raise one more possible wrinkle, and that is the the chancellor or the president says, "I'm ready to come back," but he, she, or it may not be ready to come back. I was involved in one of those situations some years ago, which got pretty difficult. Um, and at some point, if it's a chancellor, I think the board has to make if we're in that situation, the board has to make a judgment if there's this kind of ambiguity.
Yeah, Karen, sorry.
May I ask a clarifying question, Regent Bloom? Are you talking about somebody who's coming back from a medical leave and they're not necessarily fit? In which case there are other rules or provisions in an employment agreement that may come into play in that instance that are
Well-
separate and apart from the designation in and of itself, if I'm understanding you correctly.
I think I'm talking about coming back from the longer term from a medical leave, from a medical situation.
Correct.
And,
Typically,
I mean, we had, we had policies in my former life where if there was doubt, if the person's physician said they're fit to come back, the college or the university had the option of having their own physician. And then if there was ambiguity, the two physicians would pick a third position. I mean, this can get pretty, the point before, we need to have somebody, we need to know who's in charge. We have to have if we have something like this, we have to have a quicker way of dealing with that, I think.
if, if, if I may, Mr. Chairman, there are presumably somebody who's out for a medical leave of that extended period of time. They are out on an approved leave, either it's FMLA or because they have a physician's note. And there are provisions that currently exist within our rules for somebody to undergo a fitness for duty examination if necessary, if there is a dispute as to whether or not the person is able to come back. And in this particular type of role, because it's a key leader in the role, there are provisions, we touched on it briefly, for example, in the provision which says if the chancellor is unable to do his duties for 90 days, you can step in before, and make decisions even before the medical leave is over if you choose to, because it's a key enough position that it has a 90-day point in the contract, in the employment agreement, where you get to step in and make decisions at that point in time.
Yeah, my personal feeling real quick is that we should be really careful to make sure this is just a succession policy and not get into larger contract issues or our role vis-a-vis the chancellor in terms of performance and so on and so forth. And I think what Karen just says allows us to address, Ira, what you just brought up in a way that doesn't create new policy. And I would not be comfortable adding language into the succession policy that addresses that issue. Personally, that's just me. Any other questions or comments? Then I know we want to do this sooner rather than later, but Karen, can we ask you to take what we discussed today and come back to us with one policy which we could review the next time our committee meets, with the goal, I hope, of passing it along, possibly with some further tweaks, but passing it along fairly quickly to the full board. Is everybody comfortable with that?
Yes.
Yes.
All right. Thanks. Thanks, Karen. Really appreciate the work you did on this. We're already pushing an hour, and we do have a full agenda. I honestly didn't expect that we'd be able to do justice to everything on this agenda, but I hope we can at least touch on what's left here. So I'm going to try to move through the next few items fairly quickly. Everybody good with that?
Yes.
Okay. So next is the board member orientation schedule, and that's a really important issue which we've already started. I think maybe Juanita, you got us started on that, and thank you for that. I'd be interested to know if anyone does know how many responses to that doodle poll we've gotten, and whether we need to provide further encouragement for board members to sign up and get this orientation scheduled. Anybody know?
I have seen some responses. I apologize, Mr. Chairman. My admin is out today dealing with an emergent issue, a family issue. And so I did not get a chance to find out how many responses to the doodle poll we have. But we held the dates figuring and the times based on what was most popular. We will add dates. Not everybody will be able to make these particular dates. And so those that are not, this is not intended to be static and occur just in that time frame, but to add more dates based on what we get in terms of response for those first sessions.
Do you
Okay.
have a priority in terms of which responses are, for example, we have 2 new board members, and we have 2 who have been here in a relatively short period of time that have never had any orientation. Are we prioritizing, the availability of the people who have been least exposed to the workings and the meetings and the documents, or is that
Yes, and
okay?
so that is the goal. And that's why I'm talking about we can add additional sessions, because the board did express that they would like everybody to go back or go through the training materials. And so this would not be the only time that we would do this.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. Any further discussion on this item? We again, thanks to Juanita, we already have a draft agenda for how the orientation will go. And I think where we are now is just getting the first meeting scheduled and subsequent meetings if necessary. So I'm excited about this. I think it's really important, not to mention the fact that, again, it's required by law now, and we need to be compliant. So
It's usually a good thing.
yeah, right. Good. So if everybody's okay with that, we'll move on to the number 7 on the agenda, Board of Regents governance review and discussion. The chart or the matrix member information, we're going to add a couple columns. Is there any discussion around that new matrix? Karen, I'm looking to you again.
Yes, I expect to have it to the board to look at, make sure that I've captured, or the committee, to make sure that I've captured what you want on it. I'm finalizing that now. It will be an internal document for the board's usage. It's not something we could publish it. So, you would have to let me know your preference for that, and it could exist on our website. The current board members are up with their photographs on our website and their bios. It doesn't necessarily include their appointment dates. That certainly could be added. But this is, I'm preparing it not in a pretty format, because we haven't had the discussion as to whether you want it published. I would put it in a more stylized format if it was something you wanted to be up on our website.
Any discussion on that? I think Karen's asking specifically, do we want this to be a public document? Anybody?
I don't think it's necessary for this to be published, particularly if you're going to build on it, as if to say, when we're looking at candidates, having conversations about which gaps or which holes do we think they fill, then it becomes speculative. And I think the fact that we have our board members up on our website with bios is sufficient. And this was more of a tool for us to be working with internally to see who we should possibly think about, pursuing, given, where we are in terms of the matrix.
Yeah,
Makes
I
good
would
sense.
agree with
Any other
that.
comments? Yeah,
I would agree with Juanita.
thanks, Ira. Thank you. Any other comments or questions about this one? Okay, so Karen's gonna share the matrix with the board at this point for their review. Does this require any kind of formal action on the part of the board, or is it just an informational item?
No, it's just an informational item, and the first one you will get will be a draft, because it's, to make sure that I've hit all the marks that you are asking for.
Okay, everybody good with that? Okay, great, thank you. Next item is board vacancies. I think you told us that there are a couple vacancies at this point.
There are currently 2 vacancies, and with Regent Wright looking to step off on June 30th, we will have a 3rd vacancy on the board sometime mid-year.
So in the interest of time, and because I think this will be an ongoing responsibility of our committee, can we just spend just a couple minutes talking about how within our committee we can come up with names for consideration by our committee and then forwarding to the appropriate nominating person? Anybody?
I think we should share with the committee the CV or the bio of one of the candidates that Marty and I think Ira, you met with as well last year, when we were looking for potential board candidates to recommend to the governor. Diana, okay, I'm blanking out on her name.
Um,
Karen, you remember?
I do. I don't remember the individual's name, but in case, depending on the level of interest, I would, not necessarily talk about
So
that.
we had begun some preliminary discussions in case, for example, Elise decided not to renew this year. Or so we were kind of trying to start thinking about a pipeline. And I know there was one person that we spoke to, and it's about the same time, it actually predates when we started talking to Don. And we thought, based on where we were from a governance and standpoint, we were anxious to get Don on. But
Yeah.
I think she's somebody, and I don't know if there was anyone else. Adam was supposed to be getting Martin Looney to give us a candidate, and that's been a conversation that's been going on for about, 2 years now, Adam?
Conversations are on.
Yeah. So, we couldn't hear you.
Now?
Yep.
Yeah. Yep.
I was just reporting conversations are ongoing.
And 2 of our regents are going through the executive and legislative nominations process this session.
Right.
Regent Williams and Regent Cummings.
Yeah. Good. Good. Do we need to spend any time right now talking about how this process should function going forward? It sounds like, Juanita, you've been busy. helping to try to vet certain names and get them to the right appointing authority. Is there anything we need to be proactive about now?
You know, Rick, I think when we get the matrix back, the board
Yeah.
questionnaire, then we would have a better discussion to say, do you know
Yep.
someone here or do you know someone there that we can at least begin to socialize with the appointing bodies? I had actually been given a couple of recommendations by a colleague, and they were both very interesting. In one case, it turned out that we already had a relationship with them through their organization. In another, they were providing some services, so it would have presented a conflict of interest. But if we ever get to the point where we want some advisory councils, and this one was directly related to the workforce initiative, that this might be somebody we could consider then, but as a region, it would have been a conflict of interest.
Mhm.
So if we have this matrix, we can be brainstorming
Mhm.
people that we might want to put in front of the legislators or the governor or each other to say, oh, we really should pursue this or see if we can, find a way to get this person in the pipeline.
Yep, that makes perfect sense. It sounds good. Other questions or comments about this one? What if in the future, as long as there were vacancies on our board, we made this a standing agenda item? And if we need to spend more time, so be it. If we can pass right over it, so be it.
I like that idea because it kind of keeps it in the front of our minds.
Keeps it in front of our minds, and even when there maybe isn't a vacancy at that particular time, if one of us has a recommendation, we can certainly add it and have it available, quickly if and when the need arises.
Yeah. Because I know Elise is definitely coming off this year, and Regent Balducci said he thinks he wants this to be his last year. He's been doing this for a really, really long time. So he might change his mind, but he, or we might convince him to change his mind. But at the moment, just knowing that he's thinking about 2027 as being his opportunity to pass the baton, that might be something we would want to consider.
Yep. Thanks, Juanita. Other questions or comments on this one? Okay, good. Thank you.
Karen had her hand up.
Wait, I'm sorry. Who did I miss?
Karen has her hand up.
Please.
Yeah, I was gonna say we could even broaden it a little bit in terms of a standing item and just have it be board engagement, because to your point, there are other people that you were talking to that may be, work that the board is doing that they would play an advisory role. So broaden it to sort of board engagement.
Yeah, I like it. Okay, good. Next is something that, as I mentioned earlier, that I'm concerned about, and that I hope that we can clarify sooner rather than later. But Karen, this is the question about whether we need an executive committee empowered to act on behalf of the board in between meetings in emergent circumstances, or whether it's special meetings or some combination of different options. And Karen's done some nice research for us into the current law with regard to open public meetings and freedom of information. And I know it's already almost 10 after 4, but I hope we could spend a couple minutes on this, even if we don't resolve it fully today. I really believe we need to be clear to us, to ourselves, and to the rest of the world how that works for us. Karen, do you mind spending a minute or two summarizing what you've learned by looking at the current statutes? And maybe you're going to say we're covered already. I don't know.
Certainly. I provided in the packet excerpts from the Freedom of Information Act, which talk about what is necessary for a board to act quickly or in emergent circumstances. For a special meeting, it's a 24-hour posting of the agenda, 24 hours in advance. excluding Saturdays, Sundays, and holidays. But there also is a provision where an emergency special meeting in terms of when they're required to be filed. And there is a little bit of a grace in the event that there is an emergency that occurs. And what it provides for is certain things to be posted in a quicker period of time following action in those circumstances. The second piece that I provided to the committee members is an excerpt from our existing bylaws, which we have not amended the bylaws to eliminate the executive committee. And it says that you do have an executive committee, and the purposes of the executive committee are to act in emergent circumstances when delaying action to a full board meeting could result in significant risk, expense, disruption to the university's college and operations. The second part of that section is what the executive committee used to operate as the governance committee as well. In essence, the action in creating the governance committee has superseded the second part of that executive committee, the part that I've highlighted. And so it's on your books. You could leave it as it is, activate it only in the event of an emergency. You also have the option to reduce the number of members that are on the executive committee if you need to act more nimbly in that regard. But it provides for the board chair, vice chair, and the chairs of your standing committees, as well as the chancellor in an ex officio non-voting member. So you have an executive committee that exists. It hasn't been activated, but that doesn't mean that it can't be activated as it currently sits when there is an emergent circumstance, unless you strip it out of your bylaws.
Thanks, Karen. Questions or comments? Any strong feelings on this? Ira, please. I can guess what you're going to say because you've said that you've been clear before, and I kind of agree with the way you see it. Go ahead.
You want to make my statement then?
No, I'm sorry. My bad.
No, I think we may have the ideal circumstance now. We have two ways of dealing with an emergency, from what Karen is saying. One is to activate the executive committee, which, as Rick knows, I am in favor. To deal with, as long as we're clear, it's not there to deal with routine matters. It's there to deal only with emergencies or emergent circumstances. And we have the option of calling a full meeting, a quick meeting of the full board. I think that leaves it really up to the board chair to decide. And I think that's a good situation. He could choose, chair could choose call an executive committee meeting. The chair could choose to call an emergency meeting of the full board.
Okay. Yep, I hear you, Ira. Other questions or comments on this one?
Maybe we just need to remind people that we do have this option, so that, because others may be concerned about what happens if, particularly in today's world when there's so much volatility. So we might just want to remind the board that we actually, in case of an emergency, we actually have a process in place to enable us to handle it and make people feel a little more comfortable that we've just got a mechanism in place.
Yeah, I like that too, Anita. My guess is that we have board members that are not aware of this, of both of these options, really. And it would be good, maybe as part of the orientation or as an item on a regular board meeting, to make sure people understand we have these tools to make emergency decisions.
Yeah, no, I agree with Juanita, and thank you, Karen, for the research and unearthing the archaeological dig necessary to find out that there was an executive or is an executive committee in theory. But as Juanita said, anybody who's on that executive committee, the committee chairs and whatever the exact makeup of it, should receive some notification that, guess what? In the event that the board chair says, we got a big problem on our hands, we've got to call the executive committee together, you're on it. I mean, it would be good to know.
Yeah.
Here's a I don't want to gum up the works because everything that's been said makes good sense to me. If the board chair had to invoke that and call a meeting of the executive committee, should we have a way to inform the rest of the board at least that it's happening, so that if anyone wanted to weigh in, that they would have that opportunity, even if it's just with 24 hours notice or something like that? Am I overthinking this?
No, if an executive committee was called, I think you could absolutely include every board member in that notice.
Hmm.
There's nothing which prohibits that.
So, and presumably then a non-member of the executive committee could attend the executive committee meeting or not?
Certainly, they would not count towards your quorum, but they certainly can be there, much in the way that Regent Williams attended the GNC committee meetings as a guest during that, before the formal appointment to the committee. So
Yeah.
absolutely.
Does anyone strongly object to that?
No.
No, I think the more people know, in that kind of a situation, the better. Then nobody feels blindsided.
Yeah. And Karen, to your point, other board members could attend, but they wouldn't be voting members either. They're not counted on the quorum and they're not going to vote in that meeting. Is that accurate?
That is accurate. And that's where as you mentioned earlier, Mr. Chairman, is whether or not, the board chair calls an emergency meeting of the full board, in which case you'd still need a quorum, or you call an
Yeah.
emergency meeting, based on the executive committee.
Okay. Any objections to this?
No.
I think it's a
good.
good plan.
Yeah.
I think I spent too much time worrying about it because it looks like we already had it figured out. But I do think we need to share information with more people, certainly on the board, but other people as well. So no one will think that anyway, if we could do that at a meeting in the not too distant future, I would appreciate it. And it should be part of the orientation too, I think. Everybody okay?
Yep, good
Absolutely.
idea.
Good.
Thank you.
Okay, good. Item 8 on the agenda is the Charter Review Committee Charter Review. And here, I welcome any questions or comments. It seems to me one thing we could do today at least is to put on the table the idea of the order of the committees and how we'll carry out that work going forward. Any thoughts or questions or suggestions?
Already
I have-
reviewed GN's.
I have to admit, I haven't really thought about this one that much yet. I was looking at a lot of the other stuff for the meeting, but it wasn't, I didn't review
Me
this.
too, to be honest, Juanita.
Yeah.
Yeah, no,
Honestly.
that makes three of us.
Yeah.
Anybody, you could just go alphabetical, for each of your next committee meetings.
Do we,
I don't even
here's-
understand what we're talking about here.
For each of the committees that we have has a committee charter, which probably hasn't been looked at in a really, really long time. And the question is, from a GNC standpoint, we could just ask each committee chair to review their committee charter and make recommendations, and then we could look at them as opposed to having us go through each one and try and figure out if it's the right charter. I mean, but it's
yeah.
every committee has a charter, but And I think for us, it's, do we have the right number of committees? Do we have the right people on the committees? So that I think is a good conversation for us to have, because we have a lot of committees.
Karen, is this what we were talking about at the end of the last meeting? So the
Yes.
audit committee has its own charter, and so now I'll get a chance to look at that. Okay,
Correct.
got it.
Yeah. And I like what Juanita just said. Maybe we start by asking each committee chair to make any recommendations they want. I, here's a question for people, and I'm not sure the answer. When we talk about things we'd like to change, one of the things that's come up a few times is, could we be, especially with regard to finance and budgets and things like that, could we be presented with recommendations and the necessary background and with enough time to really think through these decisions so that we're not up against a deadline? Is that something that gets discussed in a charter, or is it something altogether different?
I I think it could be in the charter of the finance committee to
Yeah.
one of their responsibilities is to present information to the board that require board approval in a timely fashion for consideration or something along those lines.
Yeah, and of course that requires, timeliness on the part of the staff that works with.
Exactly. The finance
that committee.
committee has to really lean on the staff to say, look, we have to have time to digest these materials and the implications and have a more disciplined approach to it's a big, we've got a big budget.
Yeah,
And it's not that
and
easy to understand. So
yeah, and a couple times recently we've been faced with situations where we had to make decisions as a board with very little time or notice or information. Don.
Another something that would be useful in terms of a review of the charters would be to flag any provision in there that says thou shalt do X or Y or Z, because apparently, and Karen and I were talking about this in a previous call about the audit charter, that it said, the audit committee shall do X, and there was some time when they didn't do X, and because people don't go back and look at the charter and that sort of thing. So if we were able to distill out of every charter, what are the requirements, especially if it's on a regular basis, that the committee has to do, so that the chair and the members know, oh yeah, got to do that thing, and it's calendared more or less. It allows us to do that, just like what we were talking about earlier. If the chancellor is going to, get us on July 1st the names of the people who are going to take over in when there's an absence, then that needs to get calendared. And that's, oh whoops, we didn't get that thing for the last 3 years. I wonder what happened.
Yeah.
So if we were to look at, or you had the chairs look at each charter, and one of the things they were supposed to look for was any requirement that your committee do something specific, that we flagged that. And because that would be good for those chairs to know. It would also be good for the governance committee to have all that pulled together.
Yeah, I like it. Thank you, Don. Other questions or comments?
So Don, thank you for agreeing to chair audit.
At the end of the orientation meeting, I felt like saying, "Here, Don, have a cigar." Boom. Congratulations, Don. No, it's very interesting, and I did a little bit of this stuff when I was at CEA, an executive director, and we oversaw our annual audit, and dealing with an outside auditor, and thinking about those types of issues. So I'm not completely a fish out of water, but this is broader. It's broader and it's going to be very interesting.
We all appreciate you doing it, really. I think I'm on your committee too, Don. I promise not to make any trouble
Oh no, good. That's great. That's great.
there.
That you're going to be on the committee.
Yeah.
You can make all the trouble you want. Making trouble, making good trouble on the audit committee is actually a good thing.
Yes, I hear you. I do. I believe that actually. So number 9 on our agenda is an executive session, but I think
You have no
we are not
business executive session today, correct?
no business. Okay. Anything else for the good of the order? Anything else that people want to put on the table for us?
Why does GNC have to be a public general meeting? Why isn't it just an executive session, period? And the reason I ask that, we talk about some pretty sensitive things and we videotape it. And, you know, this has been my, issue, frankly, with being on a public board, is the fact that we don't provide enough opportunities for us to really vet, sensitive issues, talk about pluses and minuses, so that we can present, a cohesive set of recommendations to the board for consideration and approval. I feel that I feel that you don't want things to be left unsaid or concerns to be left undiscussed because, if taken out of context or just taken in isolation, they could be misinterpreted. So,
Yeah.
There are very limited circumstances, as you know, under which executive session can be invoked, and so we're cognizant of those, and it will be also a robust part of the training.
Okay. Anyone else? Anything else for the good of the order? I really appreciate it, guys. I think we did some good work today, and there's a couple things, Karen, if you need to, we can talk about. But I hope we can, in our report to the full board in a couple weeks, be able to show them, this good work that we're doing. Some of it, anyway, the stuff that's ready, and keep moving forward.
thank you, Rick. This was really good.
Yeah, it's really great to work with all of you. This is a good group. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Motion to
Oh, can I have a motion to adjourn, please?
So moved.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, good. I think that's it, everybody. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
It's nice to see all of you.
Thank you, everyone. Because have a good night.
Rest
Take
of the
care.
day.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Take care.
Stream has ended. Thank you, everybody.